Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for making time for us today. We're excited to share with you how you can leverage APIs to automate and optimize our global server load balancer Infoblox DTC. My name is Bob Rose. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for DDI Value Added Services located in our Tacoma, Washington Center of Excellence, and I'll be moderating our discussion today. So let's get started by meeting our presenters. And today, I'm glad to announce that we have some of Infoblox's leading system engineers on the call to help guide us through. That includes Scott Friedman in Dallas, Texas, Ross Gibson in Richmond, Virginia, and Sif Baksh in Denver, Colorado. Welcome, guys. Customers expect our apps to be up and running and on demand, and when they're down or they're slow to respond, it causes significant risk to customer and employee satisfaction, brand perception, productivity, and revenue. DNS-based global server load balancing enables companies to reroute network traffic to better manage servers and data centers for business continuity. However, GSLB solutions can, of course, be very expensive, and if they're deployed through multiple servers or as standalone solutions, they carry high capital and operational costs. But fortunately, Infoblox DNS Traffic Control, or DTC, combines DNS management with intelligent GSLB functionality for an automated, scalable, high performance, and unified solution. So today our goal really is to meet with you in a two-way discussion that helps us better understand your needs, but then also show you how DTC delivers better performance and faster returns, and especially determine if the solution might be a good fit for your situation. So when it comes to saving time, one of the best ways to set DTC up is by using APIs, and today our team is going to show you how it's done. So let's take a quick moment and look at the agenda. Today we're going to cover DTC Overview and advantages. We'll give you an API primer. Then we're going to contrast how to configure DTC via web UI versus APIs. We're going to use API calls to gather inputs and automate processes. And then we'll jump into some time-saving use cases, and then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So with that being said, why don't we jump into taking a look at the DTC overview. So as we get started, Ross Gibson is with us. Ross, can you give us an overview about what DTC actually is?
Sure. Scott, if you can fill out the slide, that'd be great. So just for a quick overview of what DTC is Infoblox Integrated Global Server Load Balancing, or GSLB functionality. It allows you to provide intelligent DNS responses to queries based on parameters such as client location, information gathered from performing health checks, or some combination thereof. When a client queries for a DTC record, which is known as a load balanced domain name, or LBDN, the Infoblox provides a response that contains the ideal target IP address, basically directing the client's traffic to the right server at the right time. So this enhances the user's performance and ensures that applications are kept to the highest amount of uptime possible. And all this is provided within the same UI as your DNS management. In addition, because Infoblox provides the IPAM management, you actually have the ability to take advantage of your IPAM information, which we call extensible attributes, or EAs, and you can take those EAs and use them to define topology rule sets. So it makes the management of internal geolocation rules much simpler than you would have with any other solution. And then we provide all this at a lower cost than other well-known dedicated ADC and GSLB platforms. So we like to basically say that DTC provides 90% or better of the functionality of a dedicated GSLB platform at only 20% of the cost.
Yeah, that's really outstanding. Thanks, Ross. So let's dive in a little bit more deeply into a comparison between traditional ADC GSLBs and DTC. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. So here's this basic brief comparison of traditional ADC-based platforms and Infoblox DTC. So the traditional platforms are based on, an existing layer 2, layer 3 load balancer, and they're bolted onto that. But because it's a separate system, it can't take advantage of EA information and requires you to build out either, your own custom topology database or use some other GeoIP solution if you're doing it on the internet. And because they also don't have an integrated reporting solution. They may have RPZ capability or may not, but they don't generally provide RPZ feeds. And the process for upgrading those type of solutions is usually one by one, and it can be quite manual and arduous. In contrast, the Infoblox solution started as a DNS server and thus has complete DNS server functionality. And because it holds the IPAM data, you can do topology load balancing not only on GeoIP, which is built in, or subnets like a traditional solution, but you can also use the EA data as I mentioned before. So for example, if you defined a site such as Los Angeles or New York, any network that's tagged for that site would automatically fall into a rule set built around that site tag. We have a fully integrated reporting solution that's simple to set up and easy to use. And the grid-wide software management takes what used to be weeks of work and turns it into hours. Just as an example, I'm a former customer and I had about 200 Infoblox appliances, and I would upgrade all of them in the space of maybe 2 to 3 hours in a single change window. And most of that time was basically just meant monitoring it, because it only takes basically 4 mouse clicks to upgrade an entire grid. Let's move on to one particularly timely use case for a GSLB tool like DTC. Due to GDPR going into effect in the European Union, businesses have to be extremely careful when it comes to interacting with citizens of the EU. And one way you can help control the flow and storage of data would be to ensure that any clients coming from EU countries are routed only to application instances that are housed within the EU. Now, with the Infoblox, you can do this with the built-in GeoIP database for external internet-based users, but for internal users, with using something like a region EA, you can write simple rules such as, if it's from Europe, give the Europe pool. If it's from Asia, give the Asia pool. And if it's from the Americas, give the Americas pool. So in addition to setting up the rules that way, which is easy, you also know that those rules will be automatically kept up to date as your IPAM information gets updated. So if somebody builds a new network in Europe and tags it as a Europe network, then you know it will fall into the European instances automatically. And we'll jump forward.
Yeah, so I think we want to share also about the value just in terms of better experience and lower cost. One of the big problems, right, that we hear and that we face is that when apps are slow, complaints rack up, either customer complaints or perhaps complaints that go to the NOC, and that's a real challenge. But DTC improves user experience and delivers GSLB performance. Ross, can you walk us through perhaps some of the ways that experience and performance is improved through DTC?
Sure. So on the intranet side, obviously you can do load balancing via that deep IPAM integration, which gives you things. You can balance things like time accounting, software building farms, trading applications, HR applications. You can kind of replicate doing a traditional server load balancer in a slightly different way. Smaller applications can just use DTC as an SLB. For DR, obviously that's a very key use case for internal applications for automating your disaster recovery. You can consolidate zones and views in certain instances. On the internet side, you can do geo load balancing, right? There's a MaxMind database automatically built in, so you can choose things by region, country, things like that. So that can help you, take shopping, for example, corporate websites, or really any large website that has different country or region specific pages. Typically you're doing it across geographically dispersed data centers, or it could also be used in a DR scenario. And with the GeoIPs, you can help to solve EU customers to help with GDPR, as I pointed out before. And then we provide a flexible number of health checks, whether that be something HTTP or HTTPS, which you actually can not only do it based on codes, but you can actually parse and use regular expressions to look for specific data within the returned page. You can also use SNMP and some others to provide information about load and try to distribute load as well.
Yeah, another thing too, Ross, is the issue of traditional ADCs. A lot of times they'll use 2 or more servers, right? And so as soon as you have that scenario, you've got lots of headaches. And not only that, but the costs go up, the operating and management overhead increases. Can you talk a little bit about how the DTC solution compares with that?
Well, from a perspective of ease of management, obviously you don't have to maintain a separate topology database. You don't have to maintain separate code, separate upgrade schedules, and things like that. And being able to see all of your data in one place, for example, with an LBDN, you can see it right in the zone along with all the other records, which is not something you would necessarily see in the case of an ADC setup.
Right, and it's fairly quick, right, to deploy because of the license model usually takes perhaps less than about 20 minutes. And for those that are customers, they don't need any additional hardware. And also, right, the ease of use with our graphical user interface shows those visualizations of server relationships. And so you don't really need any special programming skills.
Correct.
So if we take a look to the next slide, reporting and analytics is another key aspect, and how DTC is actually integrated with DDI. Reporting analytics actually provides real-time management. We have extensive customizable historical reporting and predictive analytic engines. Integrated, of course, with DNS and DHCP and IPAM. And it's all really built on the Splunk reporting and visualization tool. And so what you're seeing in this slide is really one of our next level reports. This is a DTC response distribution trend. And this tracks the responses of DNS traffic control over time, and it provides trending. And so this is used by app and operations admins, and it's important because it monitors the response distribution trends for DTC resources over time. It is a pre-engineered, pre-built report that comes available free with reporting and analytics. It's part of the dashboards tab. And the use case that's used most often is that this pinpoints a trend of abnormal network traffic distributions with impacted performance. So where you see the spikes, for example, gives you great insight when using DTC, so that you can see exactly the anomalies that are going on within the system. So this is just one example of over 100 pre-built, pre-engineered, and customizable reports that are available with the reporting and analytics solution. Of course, you can collect and analyze and visualize granular core network data. There's free-form searches and interactive reports and dashboards where you can really drill down and see what's going on the network. You can do detailed investigation using query logging. There are predictive analytics to predict when your DHCP leases might exceed their limits, and also you can capture and share reports with the Infoblox community and those within your organization. And of course, you can manage your DDI deployments. And so you get greater reliability, greater visibility, greater security, because you can see it, and if you can see it, you can manage it. So this is just part of the integration of DTC with the overall reporting and analytics solution provided by Infoblox. What we'd like to do now is turn back to you, our audience. We have our first polling question today, and I'm going to launch that poll. Currently, you can take a look at it and see. What we'd like to know is, what is most important to you in a GSLB? Select your single best answer. Perhaps it's integration with DDI. Perhaps it's around configuring and importing data through CSV. Maybe it's around the graphic UI, so you can see everything in a single view. Maybe it's leveraging IPAM, extensible attributes, or it's around cost. And so please go ahead and provide your feedback. We're very interested. This helps us to tailor you know, our content more toward your needs. So we'll go ahead and leave the poll open for a few more seconds. If you haven't voted yet, please go ahead and do so. And then I will end the poll and we'll share the results with our audience. And we'll give it just a couple more seconds. Go ahead and vote if you haven't. And I will go ahead and end the poll. And so what I'd like to do is share out the results now. So it looks like the majority are interested in integration with DDI, followed by the graphical UI. So we do appreciate that feedback. And also, several of you are interested in the cost. So I will go ahead and stop sharing now. We will be looking now into more of the nitty-gritty of what we are focusing on today. And as we look at this next slide, what differentiates the Infoblox DTC API? So we want to just cover this quickly. So I'll go ahead and turn this back to our SE team.
Sorry, this is Sip Batch joining the DTC call here. Reason for that is API, what we love about API and what it actually means to you. Some of the things it can give you is easily back-end data changes that you can do with automation. One of the cool pieces I like about it is the flexibility and reliability that you can build into the product. And one of the things that we'll give you out of this is actually a fully featured API call to actually push out a fully developed DTC solution. And Scott's going to demo that for us a little bit later on. I love automation, and you can always reach us on our community side as well. So that's one of the things that we're here to discuss. With our DTC API, what I love about it is the flexibility of either creating server, adding to the pool, removing from the pool as well. So you don't have to just rely on everything Infoblox have. You can actually do some stuff outside of the API and make calls to NIOS as well. For example here, thank you. You read my mind, that's weird. For example, here is one API call showing you the first one at the top is showing you at the top here saying where to find all our API documentation, as well as our community site has tons of this examples. The first example we're going to cover here is showing you how to actually create a server in DTC. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward. Although, shouldn't say that. It's pretty straightforward to me because I do this almost every other day. The cool part is you can see simplicity of one API call just to create one server. So say you have 4 or 5 servers, you just basically reiterate that call, changing the server name, changing the host IP, and that's all you would do. And after, for each call that you make, you're actually going to get these reference ID. After you create it, those reference ID will be later on used in our creating the pool and stuff like that, and which you can see down here at the bottom. But we'll cover that later in the demo. One of the nice part about that is the next call was actually creating the pool. And then here we'll show you configuring DTC via the web and then versus the API. Go ahead, Scott, want to take that?
All right, thank you, Sif. So let me open up this demo real quick, and I'm going to start sharing it. So the first thing I'm going to do is build out a DTC config from complete blank screen. So our traffic control configuration is located under our DNS tab, the same place you go for configuring everything else DNS-wise. So I'm going to start in a zone, and I'm simply going to take these DNS records that I have configured, and I'm going to turn them into servers that DTC can use to resolve names to. So I'm going to add this server. We've got the name and the IP that the object has. And then, Ross talked about the extensible attributes. This is metadata that's on any object within our database, and you can give it, such as a town or a building or a VLAN or what have you. So I've got 2 different towns configured, one in Dallas and one in Paris. I'm going to add those 4 servers as DTC servers, and when I'm done and I go back to the DTC page, I've got them all here, and then I can start configuring the pools that we're going to use and the name that we're going to resolve everything to. So I'm going to start with a pool, which is a collection of servers, those 4 servers that I configured. I'm going to create one pool for Dallas and one for Paris, and then add those 3 servers into the Dallas one. Now, Ross talked about the different health check monitors that we've got, and we've got some simple ones. ICMP is good to tell you if something's alive, but doesn't really give you much information outside of that. So TCP is good to make sure a service is listening, but then the HTTP one, like Ross talked about, allows you to make sure the web service is actually giving you what you're expecting, right? Are we getting 200 messages back? Is the server healthy? The SNMP one is the one that I'm using, and that's just an SNMP check on kind of any resource that a server will allow you to do an SNMP get for. So I've got it configured to do CPU utilization of my server, so I can check all the servers and figure out which one is the most optimal to send the request to. The different load balancing methods allow you to control how traffic is flowing to all your different servers. We've got the ability to do active and standby with global availability. We've got round robin and a little more dynamic load balancing, such as the health check monitor responses. We've also got the topology one. So Ross talked about not only can we decide how to resolve these queries based on the subnet the user's on, or where we get the query from, or any of our extensible attribute data in our database, as well as GeoIP information. So at the end of this, I'm gonna set it up using the SNMP one. For now, I'm gonna start with round robin, and we'll kind of finish setting that up from there. We're gonna add the pool members in there that we're gonna load balance between. And finally, I'm gonna tell it which site or which town I'm in, and then I'm gonna hit Dallas for this one, and then I'm gonna save it. And then I'm gonna do the same thing for the Paris pool. So then I'll have 2 pools, one with 3 servers and one with the 4th server. And then finally, I'm gonna set up the what we call the load balance domain name. This is the actual name that we're getting the DNS query from that we're gonna resolve. And you can put multiples in here. You can use regular expressions and wildcards if you want as well. We have load balancing options again here at the top level. So this is between pools, which could be in different data centers. I'm selecting global availability. So I can send everything to Dallas as long as those servers are healthy. And then when they're all failed, I'll send it over to Paris. Lastly, we select which DNS zones we're associating this with, and which types of records that we're gonna listen for. I tell it which pools we're using. And finally, I'm going to save it. And then once I save it, it then wants to prompt for a service restart. Those of you that are current Infoblox customers know when you make changes that require reloading the DNS config, it has to restart the service. So we'll let that happen. And once that's done, then I end up with this. And this is what my DTC configuration looks like. So I've got my LBDN at the top. I've got my pools in the middle. And then I've got my servers underneath it. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a topology rule. So Ross talked about we can do topology based on GeoIP or subnet or extensible attribute. So for this one, I'm going to select the subnet rule, and I'm going to define which networks go to which pools. You can mix and match these as well, so you can use one along with geography. So I'm going to select which networks I want to pass traffic from. So I'm going to select 1.0, and it's going to be on the Dallas pool. And I'm going to select the 3.0 network and tell it to send it to the Paris pool. And then once I save it, then the last thing I need to do is I need to go back into the configuration for my LBDN and tell it that instead of using global availability now I want to use topology. So now I can use both my data centers in an active-active scenario and determine traffic, again, based on this topology. But we could also base on the GeoIP database that we have and decide, if you're in certain continents, Europe or Asia, you can go to the Paris one, and if you're in the US, or you could say if you're anywhere else, then you can go to the Dallas pool. So that's what it looks like configuring through our UI. That's kind of point and clicking your way through it. Now let me go back to here. So now I'm gonna have Sif talk about doing stuff with the API call and give a little more detail around the API. Let's talk about what we're gonna do. I'm gonna do the API demo here in just a second. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to see and what maybe what a post is in API terms.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry. Is basically we're giving you a URL of the entire this functionality is instead of making one API calls like I showed you before, we're going to demo, first we're going to demo the couple API calls singularly, then at the end we're going to show you this.
Right, so I think we're having a little bit of a bad connection there, Sif. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna show a couple different ways that we can use the API to manipulate the configuration. So we're gonna do a get and kind of look at the config and see what it's doing, and then we're gonna do posts, and posts are pushing data into it or sending changes up to it. So so I'll show what that looks like, and these are written in JSON, and we support different languages to be able to do API calls, right, Sif? think Sif's got a bad connection. So. Okay, so so we've got a bunch of API use cases of things, and there's, you know, if you look at the list of all the different API commands, there's about anything that you think you'd want to do, and you know, whether you want to, you know, get what next available network is, or the next available IP, or see what your network space looks like. If you want to, you know, look at your DNS zones, make DNS record changes, and again, back to the DTC, you know, one of the things we're going to show is, you know, creating all those different objects I just did in the demo, in the UI. I'm going to show creating those in the API.
All right. So at this point,
And I'm sorry, I'm back. Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Right before you go to the polling question, you mind if I just comment on what Scott mentioned? My apologies. Is my audio better?
Go ahead.
Sorry. So the one thing with API is giving you the flexibility. It's a RESTful API, so you can write any language you want. Python, Go, Perl, whichever you want. That's the beauty of the RESTful API, and all the syntax you send over is JSON, or it could be
Okay, thanks, Sif. Appreciate that. So what we'd like to do now, again, is turn it back to you. You've seen the poll that's listed here. I'm going to launch that out now, and we'd like to get your feedback. How do you make changes currently in your grid? If you're a customer, please go ahead and select your best single answer. You can see the choices there. So we'll just go ahead and leave this open for a few more seconds. The votes are coming in really fast, so thank you for sharing your feedback, and we'll close that off in just a few moments. Go ahead and vote if you haven't had a chance yet, and we'll give you a chance to do that now. Okay, and we'll be wrapping it up, waiting for just a couple of more votes, and then we'll wrap it up. And I will be ending the poll now. So at this point, it looks like the GUI is the main way that folks use currently to update changes to the grid. A few of you use API, so hopefully that will change theirs. CSV is kind of following up the rear. So thank you for that. Going ahead now to turn it back to Scott. Scott, why don't you go ahead and walk us through?
Yeah, so let's take a look at what the API looks like. And I'm using an application on Mac called Postman. And is it sharing right now, Bob?
Yeah, it looks good. Thank you.
Okay. So we've got a couple different, a bunch of different DTC-based kind of API calls. And the first one I'm going to show is sort of we're just going to look at send a get and try and find out all my different DNS zones. So if I hit send, what I'm doing is I'm sending this call to out to my server, which is kind of configured here. And then it's giving me this back. So it's kind of giving me, here's all my different DNS zones that I have configured in my GUI. The next one I'm going to do is actually, hold on, let me run this first. Okay. So now I'm going to run this, and what this is going to do, actually, let me change my sharing for a second. It's easier to see it with the GUI right under it. So I'm going to go back to my GUI and show that there's nothing there. So I've cleared out everything that I had in there after the demo I ran. So let me restart my services. So we've got nothing here. Everything's completely clean. Now I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to say I want to configure that first server that I set up. So I'm going to hit send, and it gives me this response back, which is a good response because this is what it did. And if I go back over here, if I hit refresh, I've got that server. So now I'm going to create a pool. So I'm going to create exactly that pool I had there, Dallas pool, that I did in the first one. So I'm going to hit send, and now I've got a pool. So let's refresh this. And I've got a pool, and in that pool I've got a server. Now the next thing I'm going to do is the LBDN. So that was the last thing I set up. So I'm going to hit send on this one. And now I've got an LBDN with this name here. Just like that. And of course, then the Infoblox wants me to restart. So let's do that. And in a minute, this is going to go green. Now, what's happening right now is, now that I've configured this, the Infoblox DNS member is now health checking on those that www1 server. It's now trying to do health checks, and as soon as they start passing, and this thing detects that, it's going to go green, and this thing will start working. So it's right away. Once that thing happens, it's going to be responding to DNS queries. And now, if I want, I can create the other servers just by running this. And what I'll do is, if I go here and I want to look at all my pools now, I can hit send, and it's going to tell me that I've got my Dallas pool. And this is the information you need if you want to take this, use this in other places. So, Sif, maybe you want to talk about these references.
So the when to modify or add, delete the pool, that is the actual reference ID that you would need. It's the name, unfortunately, with API, because of course you can have multiple names. So the API, the reference.
Right. So this is a name with a reference identifier, and if in the other API calls, when I reference it, I have to, like you said, I have to reference it, sort of like a fingerprint for this object. So now if I run this, I want to just get all my servers, and I hit that, and I can see here that I've got that one server. And if I go over here and I want to create additional servers and I run it, they'll all pop up here. I can even look at my pools. I can do all these different things here. And then the last thing I want to do is, we talked about, we've got this on our community site. We've got this post that one of our SE managers put together, and it kind of walks through, it's an example of walking through everything I did on that almost 6-minute video, which had a few pauses in it. So the start to end was about 9 or 10 minutes of configuring those things. And this kind of walks through letting you basically do all of that in one API call. So we have this posted on our community site, and we'll be able to send it out so everybody can see it. We'll put it in the chat as well, so everybody that's on right now will be able to pull it up and kind of read it. Hopefully everybody's members of the community, right? Since that's where we kind of advertise this. So let's go back to here. So now what I'm going to do, we've got 2 of these API calls in here. One that creates everything, and then one that deletes everything. So I'm going to run the delete first. And it's going to give me an error because there's some stuff not there. So let me just manually delete all these things. Let's restart this. Now let's run this. Let's send. Okay, so now I ran that, and it configured this entire thing for me. And you can see the results down here of everything that it configured. So it configured the 2 pools, the LBDN, and then all of those 4 servers. And it even configured to use my SNMP monitor that I have configured, and to set that up and use topology-based load balancing. So now if I go back over here, what's going to happen is I'm going to hit the refresh down here, and everything's there, and then it's going to prompt me to do the restart. So let's do that. And again, now that this is here and running, now what's happening is all my Infoblox members are now starting to do health check monitors on those 4 servers. So this thing will go green in just a second. And then just the same as the create as we've got the delete. So I can run the delete, and the result of the delete is going to give me the exact same thing. So it's showing me everything that we're deleting. If I go back over here and I refresh this, it's all gone. So let's restart this. And I'm going to run the create one more time. This time I'm going to let all the services restart and watch it go green. And while we give that a second to happen, I guess Ross, do we have any good questions in the Q&A?
Yeah, I think we've provided some answers for some. There was a question about whether or not you can send a restart via the API, which you can. And there was a specific question about the Paris server, and if that server's down, then what would happen? The answer I provided was basically if you set the rule sets up to have an alternate method than topology, say global availability for an example, then it would hand out the others listed in the global availability list. But if you wanted to go into specifically how this particular example is set up, you can dig into that if you like.
Yeah, I want to let this thing kind of restart a minute. Let's see if this thing goes green.
Yeah, and then there was just a request about whether or not you guys were going to show a put example.
Did we have hey Sif, did we have a put example in here that we can run?
We don't use post instead of put.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay.
Put, it's not really used in the API for when they wrote our API to make changes is always post and get. That's and well, of course, delete. So those are the 3 functionalities we use. Why the developers wrote it that way? No idea, to be honest with you.
Hey Ryan, Ryan asked a question about our user community, and I'll make sure to pass that along to the folks that do that to make sure that they get that information. You were asking about adding the zone in the LBDN record, and it's in here somewhere.
Yeah, there's a place to configure the associated zones.
Yeah, so it's right here. Yeah, so zone name. So I configure it as a variable up top here, and then when we configure the zone, there's somewhere in here where it specifies the name of the zone. Yeah, auth zones right here. Great. Well, if there's no more questions, Bob, I think we can kind of move on to the ending here.
All right, if you do have any more questions, please use the Q&A window in the Zoom console. Other than that, what we'd like to do is just quickly wrap up. And in looking at why Infoblox DTC, this is really kind of a summary. Obviously, there are a number of advantages around app uptime, ensuring app performance, centralizing management through a single pane of glass, and of course, in terms of lower cost and especially the easy deployment. Scott, can you talk to us a little bit, perhaps around the differences, especially around app uptime? What are some thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, you know, being able to keep applications aware and knowing, you know, the state of the health of your servers and the state of your applications, and, you know, being able to make those applications, you know, not only more available, but more geographically aware of where your users are. You know, we talked about at the beginning, one of the great use cases was the GDPR slide, and I think that's pretty compelling, because being able to determine where your users are, to be able to hand them, you know, the right response so they get to the proper servers is really, really important for a lot of these regulations moving forward. I think GDPR is probably the beginning. I think there's going to be more and more of these coming. So I think, you know, being able to be a little more intelligent in our decision-making process is a great thing. And, you know, we talked about, you know, the centralized GUI and being able to you know, do the trial license and turn the licensing on. You know, if you're already using your Infoblox for DNS, it makes a lot of sense to be able to enable those features on your grid.
Hey,
Yeah, just
Scott.
mentioning the GDPR too. I'm not sure how many on this call are really aware of that or up on that, but it can really impact you know, anybody working in Europe and traveling here to the United States or virtually anywhere else in the world. The fines can be very substantial, and so to have a tool that allows you to control that data is really an advantage. So I appreciate that insight. I think there was another comment.
Yeah, I was going to ask Scott if he had any info on the example of using the DTC to return the active GM. I know how you can provide an API call to provide you the role, but I don't think that's what the question was.
I don't. Maybe SIF does, but we could take that offline.
Yeah, I think I've seen.
Actually, that's a discussion we're having right now with an API call to see who is the active grid master. We can post that in later on the community site. Once this video gets posted, I can add it to there as a comment.
Yeah, I mean, if you're specifically looking for the role of a grid member, like to check if something is the grid master versus a candidate, you can actually use the capacity report. So if you do a get for the capacity report, the role of the member is actually provided there, and you can parse that out. But I'm not sure that's exactly what Ryan was asking.
And if there's some follow-up questions that folks have on the call that wanna post it in the user community, I'll be keeping an eye on that. So we'll see those and be able to respond to those as well.
Yeah, and if you want to paste that URL for the example in the chat pod, Scott, some people want to see that as well.
Hey, Scott, did you want to share anything further around app performance or perhaps the UI? You know, some of the feedback that we've gotten from customers, you know, is especially focused around how easy it is to use, right? And how great it is to have that user interface showing the pools and all of the servers associated with it.
Yeah, and it's nice because you know, like we said, you know, we can just enable the license, and then once that opens up all that in the GUI, then you'll be able to go in and set everything up and even use the API and be able to configure it right away. It's like I showed in the demo. It's super easy to add and set this stuff up and configure it and test it out. And it's really a nice thing to be able to show and like with some of the reports that Bob talked about, be able to show management and say, look, we've got, you know, much more application awareness and response times because we're more intelligent with, you know, how we're passing traffic between data centers or between servers.
The other thing too is that if you're not using Infoblox quite yet for DTC or GSLB, one of the things that you actually do today even is go to the command line in one of your appliances and just type set temp license, and you could actually get a 60-day trial license to just start taking a look around and seeing if it's something that is interesting and helpful for your application. The slide that we're showing right now is really some next steps. We have lots of content. There's a lot of free content that's available through infoblox.com. And part of the value also is we have some free learning videos that are out there using Infoblox WAPI, for example, that's available simply by going online to infoblox.com. We have some case studies. We have some endless reports. All of this really is designed to help you with more information around load balancing. We're glad, of course, to discuss any needs you have specifically. We can certainly set up a time to look at some use cases in the lab. And if you are interested in a cost-benefit analysis, you could simply reach out to the number or the email listed there, and we'll be glad to engage. So a lot of different ways to engage here. If you have any further questions, we're glad to help. And perhaps at this point, if there are any other questions, Ross or Sif or perhaps Scott, did you see anything further come in?
There's nothing else in the pod now.
Okay. Well, what we'd like to do is, again, thank you all for joining us today. We'd also like to thank Scott Friedman, Ross Gibson, and Sif Baksh, as well as Srinivas Penamuka, working behind the scenes today to help deliver this webcast. On behalf of our entire team, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next month at our next System Engineer DTC Tech Series webinar. Thank you for joining. Have a great day.